Welcome to Swelog Business Systems. In this video, we discuss about a change which we have implemented to one of our existing functionality on invoice attestation. Previously, we had three levels of attest possible, and now we have enhanced so that we have five levels of attestation possible in our system. So let's see that function in detail. As you all know, we have the provision to create attest code which we will be attaching against each supplier at the time of invoice creation so that we can save a lot of time than manually selecting each attestant. So let's take the attest code creation page, go to financial, accounts payable ledger, supplier invoices. There we have approve rule. Select it, and this is the page where we create or configure the approver codes. Currently, we have three approval codes, and if you want to add more, by clicking on this plus, you can do. And here, as you can see, previously we had only three levels of attestation possible. Now we have two more columns for having attest person 4 and the final attestant. So this is one place where we have the change. Now let's try to create an invoice. So in order to have this invoice creation, either we can manually create an invoice or we have the provision to import invoices as an XML file. First, let's try to import as an XML file and see how that changes down. That is a new thing which we currently have in the system. Go to financial, accounts payable ledger, register invoice. There we have import supplier invoice. So this is a page where we import these invoices which are in XML format. When you click on this read XML file, whatever XML file invoices that are available in the system in the correct format in which the system is expecting, that will be getting uploaded and it will be listed here. The place where you upload these files, all those information will be available here. The XML path, if PDF or whatever, all those details will be there in this screen. So this is how you import supplier invoice. So once you have the invoice details being imported here, as you can see, we don't have to manually choose the approval code. All those information are being imported here. The attest person 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. All the details you can see, and which means if you have the invoice from a certain supplier, then you will be having a certain or fixed attest code. If you want to modify, all those details we'll be discussing in our manual entry page. So this is how you do the import of Excel invoices. Now let's try to create an invoice manually. Go to financial, accounts payable ledger, register invoice, create or register invoice. Let's try to create a supplier invoice here. Let's select and give the required data, invoice number, the date in which you want in the invoice to be created, the due date. Let's give a later date. Then we have the approval code. Here, from this drop down, as you can see, the list of data that you see here are the attest codes that we have in our system. Currently, we have only three, so that is why this drop down has only three values. Let's select the first one. So we had attest person 1, 2, 3, 4, and a final attestant. So if you want to modify this attest rule for this particular supplier invoices, then here we have a new button, change default attest person. So whenever you attach this code, this will be the attest rule that we have, but you have the provision to modify these attest rules specifically for this invoice. Even if you modify here, it won't be getting changed for this attest code ATT1 if it is being used for some other invoice. Only for this invoice it will be getting changed. So if you want to modify, here we have this new button of change attest person. And this button you can view throughout this fellow, and it is possible to change all places except for the final attestant, which we will be discussing now. When you click, we get the page for modifying this attest code. Even if you want to change the attest code itself, then you can do by selecting a new one from this drop down. So here, let me change this to some other user. So UTB01 is the attest person. All the attestants remains the same. If you want to modify, you can modify by clicking on this drop down and do the change. But if you click on this end clearance or the end attestant, you can't change it here. Why? Because there is a security check for persons who have the authorization to change the end attestant. That is being configured under user creation. So apart from that, all other users can modify the attestant 1, 2 up to 4, but the end attestants can be modified only by those persons who have that authorization. So here I'm logged in as the support user. Let's see how that security check is being given. So if you choose a user here, if let's take UTB01, using which we have currently entered the data. Here we have a new field, Andhra attestant, which means provision to modify the end attestant. Here this checkbox was not selected, so that is why that user could not change the end attestant. But if you choose this particular user, that is selected, which means this user using which if you have logged in will be having the provision to modify the end attestant. So let's try to log in as this user and see how it works. Go to financial, accounts payable ledger, supplier invoice, create invoice. Here, if you choose this drop down and try to modify it here, you can see the end attestant drop down is enabled. So that is a security check. That is another change which we have in this latest version. Now let's continue. So for the user UTB01, we don't have the permission to change this end attestant. And we have more changed the first attestant from the rule that we have selected. After you modify this rule, it does please make sure you save the data. Now if you go back to the invoice creation page, you can see the first user has been modified. So this is how the flow goes. Make sure all the details are entered correctly. Here we have not entered the invoice amount. Let's give it as 250 and let's save the data. Let's save. So we have successfully saved an invoice which the number was LA251007. And if you now go back to the page where we do the attestation, financial, accounts payable ledger, register invoice, certify invoice, there we have attest. Here you can see for this user, there is an invoice pending for approval. That's why we have that in this list. You have to select the first two checkbox. Then you have to click on save if you want to attest. So before we save this data, there is one more point which has to be mentioned here for attestation. In all the cases, it is not mandatory to have the invoice being passed through various levels for attestation because, for example, if it is very small amounts and if you have that to be attested by the person one itself, then we have the provision to specify the maximum limit a particular user can approve. If that is being configured and if the invoice amount that he is supposed to attest comes under his range, automatically the remaining attest steps will be bypassed and that invoice will be considered as attested. So let's see how it is being done, and this particular feature was already there in the system and now it has been made completely functional, which will be helpful for many of our users. So let's see how that is being done. That is done under each employer level. For example, let's take the UTB01 itself, who is the first attestant here. Normally, the flow is like once this person attests, And if the second person logs in, he will also have to attest. Then step 3, 4, and finally it will be attested by the final attestant. Then only the invoice will be completely considered as attested. But if you have employer level as attest possible, let's see how it is. Under human resource, employee, create employee. If you know the employer number, specify that. And this is the details for the user UTV01. And here under approve, this is a one-time creation for all the users. And for this user, if two fields are mandatorily specified and selected here, that is the amount limit, up to which amount this user can attest, so that from that point onwards, so whatever be the level in which that user has been selected as the attest person, from that point onwards, if the amount of the invoice comes under this range, it will be considered as finally approved. And also make sure the amount limit and this checkbox is selected. Only then the final attest will be done for this user for whatever be the amount he has the privilege for. If you see for this invoice that we have previously created, the amount was 250. So this particular invoice should be approved by this employee to be 01 fully. So let's see how that change is being done. Now let's select the approve checkboxes and click on save. So that invoice is attested here. And if you go back to a invoice page and reload the data, you can see that the attest person 1, 2, 3, 4, and finally the end attestant is being modified with UTB01, because the amount for this user was 500, which was the limit for which he can approve, and the amount was only 250. So once that first user has approved, the invoice was totally approved and that code will be modified here. So this is how that function works. Hope the whole process is clear to you. Thank you for watching.